Welcome to the Amadeus Airline Podcast, the podcast with the insights for the airline industry, where we keep you up to date with the latest developments in airline technology and business. Brought to you from the experts at Amadeus, the world's leading provider of airline technology. Hello and welcome, friends, to the Amadeus Airline Podcast. In this podcast, we cover topics like how to optimize your network and sales, how to use data for better decision-making, developing customer loyalty, and more. I'm your host, David Lengen, Amadeus VP Marketing, and I'm pleased to bring you the latest episode in our podcast series, Managing Disruption in Times of Volatility, presented by Vincent Lacroix, Head of Airline Disruption Solutions at Amadeus. Vincent is joined by Al Tredinnick, Head of Commercial at our partner 15 Below, and Guy Cavanaugh from Amadeus' Strategic Partnerships team to explore how proactive disruption management strategies that consider people, organization, and technology can help airlines on their road to recovery. They will also discuss how a well-planned and executed disruption management strategy can be an opportunity to build trust and brand loyalty, protect profitability, and accelerate operational recovery. And now over to you, Vincent.
Thanks, David, and welcome everybody. In normal circumstances, we would define disruption as all unexpected, unplanned events that would happen to an airline 72 hours before flight departure. An airline's ability to react promptly to large-scale disruption is critical to its productivity, critical to maintain its customer satisfaction and loyalty. And therefore, disruption management has a significant impact on its operational cost and on its direct and future revenues. As an illustration, a few years ago, Focusrite and Amadeus estimated that during an average year, the cost of disruption would be around $60 billion USD, which would represent 8% of the airline revenues. Year on year, the number and the severity of disruptions has been growing. And yet, 2020 is not even representative of an average year. COVID-19 crisis is unprecedented in our industry. Meanwhile, we could see very impressive achievement and very good lessons and hopes for the future. So this podcast is to explore these transversal roles of people, organization, and technology in disruption management during the pandemic. We'll do this with my colleagues, Al from 15 Below and Guy from Amadeus. So Al, first, to reset the context. The past few months have been extremely challenging for the travel industry. How has COVID-19 been different to previous crises from an airline disruption management standpoint?
So thanks, Matt. Obviously, as you say, it's been completely unprecedented. The scale has been like nothing that's happened before. We've worked, with various airlines through lots of different disasters over the years, such as 9/11 and the ash cloud, and other things have gone wrong. But this is the first time that something of this scale's happened. It's the first time the whole world has had to deal with disruption, and it's the first time it hasn't got better quickly. To give you an idea, we often send, coming towards a couple of million disruption-related notifications a day. In the first few days of March, we did 18.5 million. So it just goes to show the burden there of the disruption on the industry and its need to communicate with passengers. The other thing that's obviously quite different to this is, like I said, it's not going away and it keeps changing. So, as you said, this probably isn't going to clear up until 2023, 2024. And in that time, schedules are going to be very fluid. Restrictions are going to keep changing. All of those things mean that sort of people can pick back up and then it's going to slow down again. We've seen that in the European market where, airlines have started to rebook and then quarantines have come in and they've had to cancel flights. So that is going to carry on for a long time. And I think this is probably what we're going to talk about today, but that really does mean that you need to automate as much of these processes as possible because automation handles volume very well. If there are manual interventions involved in any of the disruption processes, that causes massive issues because once you get unexpected disruptions, particularly at scale, that is going to mean that those systems will fall apart if they're not automated. So yeah, I mean that's how we see it from our perspective with the disruption.
Thanks, Al. Yeah, you've mentioned automation, scalability. Guy, what key learnings have COVID-19 provided for disruption management moving forward?
So, yeah, disruption existed before the pandemic and it will continue to exist after that. But I think what COVID-19 has done is really put disruption at the forefront of most airline executives' minds, and it's really back on the map for these airlines. The other thing I'd say is it stress tested what the airlines had in place in terms of organization, in terms of systems, and it really revealed the importance of making sure that these are updated, not just in your processes and your reporting, but also the system setup, including things like the business rules, and looking at these on a regular basis. It also brought into focus some of the areas that hadn't actively been looked at for a very long time. And this was the case for us as well. So looking at the special commercial conditions, how you can waive change penalties, refunds, etc., and how you actually manage the refunds and the vouchers. For example, we had a sudden rush of airlines needing to get the waiver policies implemented, with around 20 being implemented during the initial crisis phase. It also showed how important it is to plan for disruption and do this in a proactive way, and look at it really from a customer and your airline staff angle. The entire passenger journey needs to be taken into account, and you need to ensure that the customers are ready for their next steps, so they understand what they have for the compensation, what they have for the hotel, and what they're supposed to do. Triggering all of these processes in one go does require a very solid and agile system, which needs to be integrated across the whole ecosystem to be able to reaccommodate passengers en masse and be able for airlines to adapt their networks as quickly as possible. So I guess, Vincent, this brings a question back to you. How do you see technology playing into disruption management? And what kind of adaptations did you need to make to the systems to handle the impact of COVID-19?
Well, Guy, technology infrastructure has been largely there before COVID, but we did have to make some tweaks, as the primary intent and purpose was to recover airlines and their passengers after either industrial actions, weather hazards like big typhoons in Southeast Asia. But here it's completely different. First, airlines had to handle mass cancellations a bit ahead of time rather than answering, last minute, which mean that we had to extend the time frame of the tools that were used for near departure changes from the last 2 days to the last 2 weeks, for instance. Also, the COVID-19 put a lot of stress on the disruption management systems in terms of volume, as the airline contact centers or even the travel agent could not handle the load if it was needed in a standard circumstance. And this has accelerated the need to implement scalable recovery tools, reaccommodation optimizers, digital self-service capabilities, chatbots, or other digital compensation tokens like our partner Stranded Flight Solutions is providing. So we did receive a lot of last-minute requests from our airlines to accelerate these implementations. And just to give you an illustration of the volume, at the height of COVID, we were processing up to 2.5 million reaccommodation transactions per day. As a reference, it's 20 times more than a standard disruption, if I may say. So thanks to the scalability and the reliability brought by our cloud technology, all these systems withheld, and it allowed as well airlines to react day after day as they were rescheduling, as they were canceling destinations due to last-minute border control immigration regulations. So automation, a specific context, also brought some new needs around disruption reporting. In the past, the reporting alongside disruption and the related analysis typically took place during periodic reviews on the airline side. And it was about, to take the lessons learned and identify the best practice and have a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. But now with disruption on a massive scale like COVID, this did not apply. So we started to extract and use real-time data to be even more reactive and react rapidly, accurately to understand the situation, make the changes to our system, to our cloud platform, and also helping airline to make their decision making. We've seen as well that the automation helped airline to reduce some bottlenecks they would have if they had to do some manual handling, so fewer staff were needed to cope with the scale. And obviously this has some other nice benefits, as airlines could standardize a bit more their compensation and also control a bit the reaccommodation across airlines. So this is a bit of more control on the policy the airlines were setting up during the crisis. So you've seen technology automation was good to support, but certainly a good strategy would allow disruption to be managed as a more business as usual rather than a firefighting exercise. So, I mean, to that point, Al, what kind of advice would you give as 15 below regarding key elements of a successful disruption management strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I mean, I'd reiterate a lot of the points that that have been made already. Really, it's about having a sort of well planned out strategy that's done in advance. It's, as I said, we know that things are going to keep changing. So when airlines are looking at their strategy around disruption, it needs to be strategizing around how that can be automated and how it can stay dynamic to meet those changing needs. Those things are really important, because what you're actually planning there is, like how productive your staff can be, how well protected your revenues are, how much you can reduce the impact from a cost point of view of all of this. And it does need to be part of a very holistic plan there. You need to make sure that all the stakeholders are involved. We know as an industry, we have a tendency to sit in different silos and, treat marketing communications differently to operational communications and things like that. But actually, we're all in a disrupted world now. We will be for a long time. So all of those stakeholders need to be brought together to pre-plan these decisions. Obviously, technology is the kind of axis on which that sort of all revolves. But it is about the empathy and about making sure that we take into account all those different stakeholders on the airline side, and especially the passengers in that as well. Trying to work out what the context is for everyone, inside the airline and for the customer, is really critical in all of this. You've got to keep an eye on what everyone wants to achieve. Whether that's the revenue management, whether that's marketing, loyalty, digital. It's all kind of the same flow these days. So as RevMan are going to be optimizing their schedules, which is going to have to happen a lot, let's face it, like probably daily or weekly for the next few years, they need to make sure that the fallout of that can be handled, that the passengers can be communicated with, they can be given different solutions and options and processed, so that we can retain that loyalty and trust from the customers, so that doesn't adversely impact marketing's capability to attract those customers back in the future. Communication is very key in all of that. We say this all the time, but everyone needs to get just the right amount of information, just the right time. That's obviously where automation comes in, because if you want things to happen in real time, it's the fastest you want anything to happen, and that can only happen automatically, typically. The staff members are just as important as everyone else in this as well. At the airports and that kind of thing, it's important they get notified about delays and cancellations and changes in the operational window, so they know where to be, they know what to say, they know what the options are. It's like I said, it's good to be very holistic about this. But by the same token, you want to make sure that you're not pushing people towards those members of staff. I mean, it's important to have them there to deal with the edge cases, but everyone else, needs to be done automatically. That's always been the case. It's always been the case that you should avoid sending people to queue up either in person at a service desk or, go and call up and set them a queue virtually at a call center and that kind of thing. But it's become increasingly, really super important now. Everyone knows stories of process that's happened where to get a refund you've had to call up, and there's been all these horror stories of people sitting on the phone for 7 or 8 hours. That isn't a good way of doing things. You will lose those customers in the future. It's much better to proactively communicate with them, tell them what their options are, ask them if they like the solutions they've been given, and give them self-service options. If not, we need to avoid the kind of speak to one of our staff for more information approach. Obviously, there's a particularly with physical cues and things. There's a health implication to all of that as well these days. And we don't really want people stood in groups anymore if we can help it. And you don't want one person who has to deal with long queues of people. All of that is going to create stress and inefficiencies as well as create health risk. So what we think the like I say, you've got to pre-plan all these things. You've got to make sure you're adopting lots of different channels. You're bringing in all those stakeholders. So if you're telling the customer something, you're also telling the relevant member of staff the same thing. Maybe tell the staff member first if it's all possible, so they're empowered to deal with people when it comes up to it. But it is perfectly reasonable to gain loyalty with a customer during disruption. We shouldn't think of disruption as being something that will only ever cost us when it comes to customer loyalty and trust. It is perfectly reasonable to build a very close relationship with customers and staff members, for that matter, in a disruption environment. You just need to handle it well, and handling it well means pre-planning it and having a decent strategy that thinks about that whole ecosystem. I mean, I know, Guy, sort of customer confidence and experience in disruption is kind of your speciality. Like, what do you think are the sort of critical factors to gain and regain, maintain that trust and confidence with customers throughout all of this?
Thanks, Al. I would say that customers choose flights based on trust. They have their own internal value proposition. So it is about price to begin with, but it's also about what the airline brings and the trust that they will be able to take them from A to B. And I think when there's been a disruption, you've lost that trust. It can be won back, but it needs to be looked at. And this has been particularly true during the current crisis. If you take, for example, a family of 4 who couldn't get their money back after a COVID-19 cancellation, it means they can't rebook with another airline. And it also means that they're probably unlikely to come back to the original one. And I think one of the major pieces in rebuilding the trust with a passenger is the proactive communication, as Al will always say. And it's also about offering some self-service capabilities, because your customer feels vulnerable and they need to have the information that they want and need in a timely manner. And this is something that's been reflected in, I think, all of the industry surveys. It consistently comes out at the top of the passenger requirements or passenger complaints. I would also say that face-to-face is very important. Passengers shouldn't have to queue for this, but they want some reassurance, and to have a human touch is necessary, particularly where you need to show empathy. I know lots of systems are working on being able to show empathy through the other traveller touchpoints, but it becomes difficult to do so. This also means that before you reach out to your customers, you need to do some background work. Most airlines have a huge amount of information on their customers, and they can actually use that to treat them better and to give a better customer experience. It also means that you can try and avoid the chaos as multiple partners are trying to resolve and contact the passengers at the same time. So what we would say normally is that you offer your customers a choice once you've done the initial work. And it's important to say that you don't offer too much choice, because this can cause confusion and just drive the customers to seek reassurance with the manned channels, to understand that the choice that they've made is actually the correct one. The last point I would make is that reporting is really important. We were doing some work with an airline just before where we were trying to understand how successful their handling of disruption management had been in terms of customer satisfaction. And if you can measure that, it's essential to then go back and adjust your policies to make sure that you're offering the best that you can.
Guy, you were mentioning the notion of trust and expectation of choice, and those are good points that lead into self-service. What do you think self-service capability could play, and what considerations do you think should be taken to make these self-service capabilities efficient during disruption management?
Thanks, Vincent. Self-service capabilities, I would say, are critical for airlines wanting to recover from disruption. And I think this has been really shown in the response to the current crisis, where call centers, which have been the traditional fallback, are not able to manage the volumes that are expected during the crisis. So in order to be able to manage disruption in a scalable and efficient way, the airlines need to have self-service capabilities. This also has the added benefit that the passengers will feel empowered. One thing I would do, though, is actually treat the passengers first if you can, before offering the choice. Because what you don't want to do is recreate the queue at the airport, but in a virtual queue, so that it's just that the first person to react gets the best choice. So you want to be able to control that in a way that you're still prioritizing those passengers that are more difficult or more important for you to prioritize. I think this also depends on the timing of the disruption. If it's the same day, everyone would expect the airline to take care of the initial protection. You offer the choice afterwards, but you would expect the airline to at least come back with an offer of getting you to A to B. If, however, it's 2 weeks out, then maybe it's best to allow the customer to select what suits them the best, and to make an offer to them that they can choose how they want to actually react to it. I would also say that self-service needs to take into consideration the entire customer journey. So you need to look at the onward flights, you need to look at the existing hotel bookings, and this is going to come to the forefront as airlines try and be more of a retailer and offer more. This will need to be taken into account in the whole disruption process. And also it needs to include the compensation. As Vincent was discussing before, we have our partners with Stranded Flight Solutions who look into that. And I would say essentially they need to be able to guide the customers to what they do next. What is their next step and what do they have to do? Lastly on this, I would say that the self-service offering needs to be consistent across all of the channels. What you want to avoid is passengers channel switching in order to get the best options. Often it's seen that the best option is going to the airport and queuing up, which is what we really want to avoid. And in order to achieve this, you normally have to have a very clear strategy. So Vincent, we touched on a number of topics with this. And the impact of COVID-19. Do you see this representing a before and after for disruption management? And also, where do you see achievable innovation moving forward?
The first thing to answer, Guy, on this is that first, the airline, they need to rely on a solid backbone IT, which enables the scalability when they are facing exceptional circumstance, and that's certainly the first lesson, and that was existing before, certainly for airlines that were facing large-scale disruption on a cyclic basis, like for instance typhoons. But now we've seen that all airlines can be affected. The second point is certainly related to the agility. When you face the unexpected, you need to be flexible. You need to reinvent things, whether it's IT, whether it's processes, and therefore the agility at scale becomes key. Agility at scale is at the enterprise level, not only for developing pieces of IT. And we've seen some very interesting moves. For instance, some airlines embracing the safe methodology, as we are doing today in Amadeus. And this is an enabler to be flexible, to align any shift of priority, and also answer to innovative requests. The second point relates to the platform. Opening the IT platform enables as well to trigger certainly new use cases and join forces. So today on the call, we have Al from 15 Below. 15 Below is managing passenger notifications. We have a series of partners. Airlines have a series of partners, and we need to as well open their services as our partners open their services, so that we combine them for our airlines. And the third point relates to all the activities that an airlines need to do to recover their passengers. It starts from the refleeting, then the crewing, then the passenger accommodation, then the notification, then the compensation of these passengers, all the servicing, etc. So all these use cases can be improved separately in isolation. But if you do this, the result could seem very fragmented and not very consistent from the customer. Hence, as you were mentioning, Guy, the customer journey, the end-to-end optimization of the recovery from the start to the end is certainly the way forward for the industry. And this comes in two angles. The first one is a structural one with the organization, the centralization of the disruption management at the core of the airline ops control center or hub control center, but also on the IT side. As for instance, Amadeus, we start looking at a possibility to optimize all these services that are either provided by Amadeus or by our partners. So beyond innovation in the technology space, we do see some room for improvement on the organizational and on the human aspect. So a closer and more proactive integration, and certainly a way to take faster decisions at the enterprise level, regardless of the business unit you are sitting in, whether it's on the airline or on the IT provider side.
So Al, I guess the same question to you. Where do you see the most important innovations for the future?
Thanks, Mike. I actually really want to reiterate Vincent's last point there. I think the innovation is going to come in the way we all work together and the speed at which we can get that work done. The technology exists and has existed for a long time to solve all these problems. It's going to be about the agility with which we can all adopt and implement that technology. So I think everyone's had to do it during COVID. All the organizations have had to learn to make decisions very quickly. Things are changing very fast, and governments are sort of putting in place legislation that needs to be acted on within days or hours in some cases. So a lot of the sort of older, more methodical way of commissioning work and doing projects is going to have to change. Everyone's going more agile now, as you guys have mentioned. So we've certainly seen that with our customers of trying to find different ways of procuring funds and things like that. Airlines are very focused at the moment on every penny, but on the other hand, they also have to remove blockers to commissioning work. So I think that's where the innovation will come, is finding new ways of working together in a more sort of agile way, so that procurement can sign off budgets for a sort of a wider set of achievable goals, and then the way those things get carried out, it gets done in a more agile way, and that allows then for a bit more sort of coherence in people's digital strategies. People still have digital strategies. I'm sure everyone wishes they'd started them a few years earlier now, but those things still need to get progressed, as well as reacting to all these more sort of, like ad hoc things that are coming through that are also urgent. So, the way what we see is it's very much about changing that way of working, becoming more dynamic, getting more coherence into those digital strategies. And as you said, scaling things like self-service and that kind of thing, so that, it can be handled automatically where possible. I think we're probably sort of getting towards the end of the amount of time we allotted for the podcast. So maybe it would be good if we all just do a quick roundup to say what our key takeaways here are. As I've just said, I think it's all about automation. It's about having that proactive strategy. It's about not being afraid of that automation as well. It's fine to put context into that granular business rules as well as personalization, so you can trust that automation. Guy, what are your key takeaways?
So I would say that COVID-19 was a forced opportunity. There's been a long-standing need to refocus on the customer journey, and the additional checks and processes that were brought in around COVID-19 are giving us that opportunity. I think it also gives us a chance to learn from the lessons that maybe we didn't learn after September the 11th. And how can we redesign a new and better customer experience going forward for all of the passengers? So, Vincent, what would be your takeaway?
Yeah, I think the COVID crisis revealed the weaknesses and the strengths of our industry, and which proved as well that many capabilities are there already, and we just have to combine them and make them deployed as fast as possible when and where needed. So, Al and Guy, that was a real pleasure to be with you today, and thanks very much for your contribution. Thanks everybody to have listened, and now I hand over back to you, David. Bye-bye.
And that wraps up this episode of the Amadeus Airline Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and will join us again for future episodes for more insights from the airline experts at Amadeus. Until then, keep up to date with the latest news by following our Amadeus for Airlines LinkedIn account. Thanks for tuning in.